Welcome to the Scarlet, Blue, and You podcast. Thank you so much for joining us in 2025. I'm Liane Youse, your Scarlet, Blue, and You host and the HLGU Alumni Director, and I'm coming to you from the beautiful Burt studio inside the Roland Fine Arts Center. So this is seriously one of my favorite podcasts of the year. It's time to roll out, and I will do a little drum roll out the Burt, Matz, Youse book list for 2025. Woo-hoo! So I'm so happy to have my special guest, Mrs. Katherine Burt, back along with our newest First Lady, Mrs. Jessica Matz. Welcome, ladies.
Very nice to be here.
Thank you for having us.
All right. So you both are fantastic readers, and I'm so excited to talk books with you once again. So it's a new year. Maybe you have new resolutions. Maybe one of those resolutions is to read more, which I always am supportive of. And we are here to help you. So today we are rolling out the Burt, Matz, Youse book list for 2024. And conveniently, it has 12 books for 12 months of the year. Now, I know this month is coming to a close, but you can make it up. Some of these are short.
All right.
You could read two in one. Okay, so should we begin?
I'm
Mrs.
ready.
Burt, would you like
I'm
to
ready.
start? Kick us off?
I will kick us off. So the first book I would like to talk about today is called Only the Beautiful. Mm-hmm. And keep that title in mind because the title is important. Only the Beautiful. It was published in 2023, written by Susan Meissner, a USA Today best-selling author with 3 novels to her credit. But this is the first Meissner novel I've read. This is a well-plotted, carefully researched historical novel telling the story of 2 women from 1938 to 1957. They're about 20 years apart in age. They live on 2 different continents and know each other only slightly. Yet they still have this same story.
I'm already intrigued.
Mm-hmm. There you go. However, they are vitally connected by a very important thread, which I shall not reveal.
Oh, okay.
The novel is divided into part 1 about a 16-year-old girl named Rosie, and she lives in California. And in part 2, there's a middle-aged woman named Helen who lives in Vienna, Austria. The human stories here are realistic and very touching. But there's a social issue that's also touched upon in this book, too. In part 1, we learn that 16-year-old Rosie is an orphan whose parents have recently died in a car accident. As a result, she's been taken in, so to speak, by her father's employer and his wife, and is working basically as a servant in their home. Her work is very difficult. Rosie has a secret that her mother, when alive, always warned her not to tell. And that secret is that when she hears words or sounds or music, she sees a kaleidoscope of colors. Now, this is an actual condition called synesthesia that actually a number of famous people have had, including Billy Joel and Pharrell Williams and Marilyn Monroe, quite a few actors, musicians, but just ordinary people as well. So her mother feared that if Rosie divulged this condition that she had, that she would be seen as somehow different and maybe treated in a negative way. Of course, stories being what they are, the secret does get out. Later, when the girl becomes pregnant because of the unwanted advances of her employer, she's sent away to a place that she believes is a home for unwed mothers. But in reality, it is anything but that. It's 1938, and Rosie has no legal grounds to object because she has become a ward of the county, so she has no rights. The unthinkable things that happen to her at this place constitute part 1 of the novel, and it's all because of her synesthesia. Part 2 tells the story of Helen, a 50-ish-year-old woman who is originally from California but has lived in Vienna, Austria for many years now. She does know Rosie, but they've not exchanged letters in a long, long time. In Vienna, Helen is the nanny for a family that has several children, including Brigitte, a little girl who has a disability. With the Nazis' hatred for disability and deformity and any kind of imperfection, and their determination to create a super race, things take a terrible turn for this young child and everyone who loves her, including Helen, her caretaker. Sadly, the Nazis planned to seize Brigitte because of her imperfection and force her into a very dark future. This spurs Helen to a life that she would never have foreseen, and part 2 tells this story. After so much pain and tragedy, the lives of Rosie and Helen merge in a gripping way to shine a light on the evil practice of eugenics, which is a means of separating out, sterilizing, and sometimes even eliminating people who are considered to be physically, mentally, or morally, quote, undesirables. And it's chilling. The first application of that, of course, that comes to mind is Hitler and exactly what he was doing during the Second World War. But what is really shocking in this book is the information that comes out about the use of eugenics in the United States. In California, it was done even into the 1970s.
Wow.
So it's an interesting read with a really heart-rending story, but also some social conscience as well.
Okay. Nice light start to the year.
So sorry.
Okay, hearing you describe the book, that's maybe not what I would have guessed from.
I know,
from the title. It takes the title in a different direction.
It does, because it means only the beautiful or only the perfect are, quote, acceptable, at least in Hitler's world.
Okay.
Horrible.
Okay, Jessica, what do you have?
My first book, also historical fiction, and probably if you're the type of person who listens to a podcast about books, I bet a lot of listeners already read it. The book is The Women by Kristin Hannah. Did either of you read it?
It's on my list
This year? You haven't read it yet.
It was given to me for Christmas.
Okay.
It's on my list.
So she is known for her deeply researched, well-written historical fiction. And I was listening to an interview she did about this book. It is about the women who served in the Vietnam War. And she said she actually had this idea over a decade ago. Like, it came to her, this is a book she wanted to write, but she wanted to let her own research skills and her own writing style grow to be able to give the topic the attention she wanted it to have. This book was powerful because I'm embarrassed to say I learned more than I would have imagined from it. The Vietnam War isn't that far back in our history. And it shone a light on facets I hadn't considered. And more than that, it prompted some conversations with my mom that were really powerful. There were questions she didn't serve in the Vietnam War, but of course she had friends who did, and she was part of that culture. And it's questions I never would have known to ask. And I've talked to other people who have said the book in itself, very powerful, but then the conversations afterwards, equally enlightening. Yeah.
Sounds good. No, it's on my list. Kristin Hannah, anything new by her pretty much goes on the list. Takes me a while to get there sometimes. Okay, my first book is actually a nonfiction book, and it's The Day the World Came to Town, 9/11 in Gander, Newfoundland. And it's by Jim Fadade. I probably really botched that up, but his first name is Jim, and he is a journalist and did excellent research on this. And it's the story of when 38 jetliners bound for the United States were forced to land at Gander International Airport in Canada by the closing of the U.S. airspace on September 11th, when the Twin Towers were bombed. The population of this small town on Newfoundland Island swelled from 10,300 people to nearly 17,000 people. So the citizens of Gander met the stranded passengers with an overwhelming display of friendship and goodwill. I mean, it makes me want to visit Gander. These people were so kind. As the passengers stepped from their airplanes, they were exhausted, hungry, obviously distraught, because they really had no idea what was going on. And they had been on board for nearly 24 hours while security checked every single thing they'd brought on board the planes. And they were greeted with a feast prepared by the local townspeople. Bus drivers who'd been on strike came off strike to help transport them. And they went to local schools, churches, even some personal homes, just to give these people a good night's rest. Linens and toiletries were brought and donated. A middle school provided showers as well as access to computers, email, televisions, allowing the passengers to stay in touch with their family and friends. Even the animals that were held in the cargo, they weren't allowed to take them off But there were locals who worried about them and got on the plane to take care of them and play with them. One of the stories is this little Cocker Spaniel puppy, which, I mean, think Lady and the Tramp here. You know, the little hat box with the Cocker Spaniel. They thought the puppy was ill, and what ends up happening is so many locals have been playing with it that it's not rested. Like it's so exhausted that it's like they think it's ill, but it's really just tired from all the play.
Poor baby.
But this book just recounts the inspiring story of the residents of Gander, and their kindness touched thousands of lives in just 4 days. Like you think this is over a long period of time, but it's not. And it's fantastic, heartwarming. If you're interested in 9/11, but you kind of don't want to hear the awful parts, this is the perfect book because they touch on the terrorism in the Twin Towers, but it's also about humanity helping humanity in the time of need. So it was just an excellent book, The Day the World Came to Town.
Sounds good.
Lauren, I had a chance to read this as well, and I'm wondering, do we need to talk about the fact that it got made into a musical as well?
It did. So our sound tech, Sabrina, knows all things musical. Have you watched it?
I have.
And?
It's neat.
It's
sorry.
We had a hard time thinking that it was a musical.
Have you seen it?
I
We
have
listened-
watched clips of some of the songs.
Yeah, we listened to some of the songs.
I really like the sound of the music. The
Okay.
staging is incredible. Because actors play multiple characters.
Okay.
Interesting.
And I love the transitions, and it's so believable, but it's the same actor, you know?
Yeah.
So the staging's amazing. And of course the story.
It's a great story.
Yeah, it is. There is some content, just to warn you.
Oh, okay. Maybe not
Disclaimer.
rated PG.
Maybe not.
Okay.
Okay. Not,
Good to
don't
know.
take your whole family.
Maybe not.
You would have thought it would have been a whole family show.
Yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes they have to feel like
Broadway.
the need to throw something in, and
Yeah.
it's like that was not necessary. But the music's very interesting. It's mostly all sung.
Okay.
But I love the staging. It's just incredible how they change locations and keep it
We're
flowing.
going to have to check that
Reading
out.
the book, I would not have readily thought it would translate well to the stage. And so I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I would recommend it once. Like, it's not one I go see again and again, you know, but I would
It
recommend
was
it.
entertaining. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's
Come From
my-
Away. I don't know if I said that. It's called Come
Yes.
From Away.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
changed the title a
Yep.
wee bit. It's kind of a long title. But it's fun.
Well, now I want to read it
It's a great book.
and see the musical.
And see the musical.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. What's your second book?
Well, second book. All right. This is my nonfiction work,
Okay.
and it has the interesting, at least interesting to me, title of 12, quote, Christian beliefs that can drive you crazy. It was published in 1994 by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend, who are relatively famous. They're licensed psychologists in practice in California and the authors of many books, including Boundaries, if you've had a chance to read that, which I actually think every human being should
a good read.
read. It's a really good read. The subtitle of Boundaries is When to Say Yes, How to Say No, and Take Control of Your Life. But anyway, this is not that book. So 12 Christian beliefs that can drive you crazy. So Drs. Cloud and Townsend wrote this book because they saw their patients struggling in counseling. They had a double burden. One burden was their emotional issue itself, which was hard enough to deal with. But the other burden was that they were handicapped by certain teachings that sounded Christian but actually were not. These ideas seemed true because the people who taught them used religious jargon and quoted scripture. But those ideas turn out to be emotional heresies. That is, they're false assumptions. They're not biblical, and they don't work. So the authors chose 12 so-called Christian beliefs, gave real-life situations from their counseling practice to illustrate how patients were misguided, and showed why and how these erroneous beliefs are untrue, backing up their discussion with Scripture. They point out how all 12 not only contradict Scripture, but also prevent the healing of the mind, heart, and soul. So just to give you a few brief examples, here are some of the misconceptions. One, the idea that it's selfish to have our needs met.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah. Second, if we're spiritual enough, we won't have any pain or sinfulness in our life.
Oh,
Wow.
wouldn't that
my.
be nice?
I started to say that's laughable, and you laughed.
I
so,
did.
Yes, for sure. Third is one that you might question, but if you read their explanation, it makes perfect sense. And that's the idea that we have to leave the past behind. So we could talk about that. The next is the idea that guilt and shame are good for us. Nope. I would say read the New Testament, people.
Yeah.
And then finally, the idea that if we have God, we don't need people.
Oh.
So anyway, those are 5 of the 12.
Okay.
So all of the fallacies are interesting to consider, and their discussion of them is truly enlightening. And then at the end, they give 6 suggestions for how not to fall prey to even any new misconceptions that come up. And most of them are centered around reading the Bible for yourself and not taking somebody else's word for it, learning how to do critical thinking, and finally, considering why you believe what you believe. Do you believe it because it's true and you can find it in the Bible, or do you believe it because Grandpa said so?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nothing against Grandpa, but you know,
Maybe.
is it just a comfortable belief?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
it. 12 Christian beliefs that can drive you crazy.
Very good.
Sounds like an important read.
Yeah, it's good.
Perfect.
Well, my next book is also nonfiction. It's called The Anxious Generation, and I'm realizing I should have pronounced authors' names out loud once. Jonathan, does anybody know for sure? Haidt? Haidt?
It sounds right.
You said it
Okay.
with confidence.
The subtitle basically tells you what you need to know. The subtitle is How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. The statistic that prompted him to begin his research and writing is since 2010, and he published, so that was 14 years when he published. Among U.S. undergraduates, diagnosis of anxiety has increased by 134%, and depression is 106% increase. So we're seeing doubling and more of the two in less than a generation. And saying, what is prompting this? His thesis is that it's twofold. First, that a play-based childhood began to decline in the 1980s, and this accelerated through the 1990s. And secondly, that in the early 2010s, smartphones came on the scene and became ubiquitous. The line he repeats often in the book is, we are overprotecting our children in the real world, and we are underprotecting them in the virtual world. As a parent of kids who are 11 to 15 myself, as somebody who has the privilege of teaching child development classes here at HLG, and as someone who lives on a college campus with all these undergrads we care about deeply, you can't ignore material like this. So I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I've heard this is a fantastic book. I have not read it.
Absolutely. I kind of sat it down after each chapter and spent a day thinking about, what does this information mean? What do we do with it, and what changes do we make?
Does he make suggestions?
He does.
Good.
He does. And they are countercultural. What
I would imagine.
What does it mean in the real world to give your child independence that maybe other people give a side eye? Are you really keeping them as safe as you should? And also, what does it mean to maybe overprotect in that virtual world, even if it means you perceive that you're missing out on something?
Right.
Interesting.
Sounds like an important book.
Absolutely.
I may have to do that. Did you listen to that, or did you
I
read it?
bounced back and forth, actually, between audiobook
I just wondered if he
and the book.
was the narrator.
He does read his own book.
I do
Yes.
like that. Okay.
Really puts the inflection in the right place when you're out there reading it.
Right. Nice. Okay. My next book is totally fiction, but based on real happenings. So that's fun. And it's about a horse, which, I got to have one animal book in there. So this one is literally called Horse by Geraldine Brooks. And this book kind of has 3 plot lines going. So it kind of starts off with a discarded painting in a junk pile, a skeleton in an attic, and the greatest racehorse in American history. That's kind of your your start point. And from these strands, a Pulitzer Prize winner braids a sweeping story of spirit, obsession, and injustice across American history. Are you hooked?
I am.
Absolutely.
Done.
Yes.
Okay.
I don't need more.
But it does resolve around 3 central storylines. One is pre-Civil War and follows the fortunes of a gifted racehorse, Lexington, and his enslaved groom, Jarrett. The second is New York City in the art world of the 1950s and a real-life art dealer, Martha Jackson. And then the contemporary storyline is in Washington, D.C. in 2019 and features Jess, an Australian woman who runs the Smithsonian Institution's osteology prep lab. So she's dealing with all that fun stuff. And she meets a guy who's dealing with American equestrian art. Who knew that was something you could study? Yeah. And so they're all linked by this portrait of a horse and his groom. And it just kind of, it keeps jumping back and forth, but everything's intertwined. And it's just a great story. It's based on a remarkably true story of the record-breaking thoroughbred Lexington. And it's a novel of art and science, love and obsession, and our unfinished reckoning with racism. So it's a great read.
It sounds delightful.
And it's so different. I loved it.
Yeah.
It was exciting and interesting, thought-provoking. It was great.
And the title is simply Horse.
Horse. You've got it.
Love it. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Number 3.
Number 3. Lauren, I apologize.
Oh, no.
I apologize for discussing yet another Fredrik Backman book.
I love Fredrik Backman.
This is My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry, published in 2013 in Sweden and in English in 2015. But I was actually trying to see if he has a book that I don't like.
Good luck.
Well, if there is one, this is not it. I truly started it expecting not to like it because I had liked the, Anxious People and A Man Called Uwe so much. So I thought this was going to be a big disappointment.
This is going to be the one.
Nope.
It disappointed you again.
No, so sorry. This is a heartwarming story of, as you know, having read it, love, friendship, loss, heartbreak, healing, and second chances, and a whole lot more than that. Like the other books of his that I've discussed, this book is hard to describe. It's hard to just simply say, okay, here it is, but I'm going to give it my best try.
Good luck.
Okay. So it shows that the world is full of people and things that are not what they seem. And I think that was the overwhelming impression I came away from this book. You have to go into it's fanciful. You have to go into it deeply to get the points. I think the best feature of it is that it's told through the eyes of a brilliant and highly unusual, truly gifted 7-year-old girl named Elsa. She has a higher IQ than probably anybody else in the book. She has understanding far beyond her years. She can quote the entire text of the first Harry Potter book from memory. She loves a stray dog and she's trying to hide him in her building. She has 0 friends, well, maybe 1.
Maybe.
Yeah, and is bullied at school. While Elsa finds her divorced parents generally annoying and really has more of a sort of a teenagery attitude toward them, she absolutely adores her grandmother, her maternal grandmother, whom she calls Granny. Granny is her one friend and is dearly beloved, her staunchest supporter. As to Granny, she's the second most important character in the book, and her presence is felt throughout. To say she is bizarre, I mean, this is not your Granny's grandmother. I mean, this is not...
She's not baking cookies.
She's not baking cookies. She is bizarre. And her exploits are legendary in the neighborhood, from picking fights to yelling at strangers to breaking into the zoo at night with Elsa. She used to be a doctor, interestingly enough, and has a checkered past. Of course, the center of her life is Elsa, with whom she has created an imaginary world of kingdoms, creatures, heroes, and fairy tales. They even have their own language. Or is it their own?
I know. That part was a little confusing.
I found that absolutely stunning. But we'll talk about that later. Unfortunately, now in her 70s, Granny is very sick and dying. Before she dies, she writes a series of apology letters. Can you imagine her needing to write apology letters? Oh, yes. Apology letters for Elsa to deliver to the numerous residents of the boarding house where Elsa lives with her family and a string of extremely unusual boarders. What those letters contain and what happens when Elsa takes on her mission of delivering them make up the whole book. Mm-hmm. It's a journey toward understanding not just for Elsa, but for the reader, too. This book has the most surprises and revelations of any book I have ever read, especially the last 6 or 7 chapters. I think I was just dumbfounded from one to the other. I laughed, I cried, I felt every emotion I think possible from start to finish. But I have 2 warnings for readers. First, some may not enjoy the digressions into Elsa and Granny's imaginary world of fairy tales. They do seem to slow the book down, but I will say they do add to the plot.
They have a purpose.
They all have a purpose. They're somehow interwoven into this story. However, if you are not a fairy tale fan, and if you are bored by those, it's perfectly fine to skip those. It won't hurt your understanding of the story at all, but to me it was fun. Mm-hmm. Secondly, be prepared that Granny uses some unsavory language. She does not speak the way our grandmother spoke, I'm pretty certain here. So she uses unsavory language, and unfortunately, Elsa has picked that up. Her using it, though, is probably showing how much she identifies with her grandmother. Mm-hmm. So there are a couple of other characters, too, whose language is a bit unsavory. But overall, I enjoyed this. I won't say fully as much as the other 2, mm-hmm. As Anxious People and A Man Called Uwe, but very, very close. I think
he's such a gifted writer.
Such a gifted
Every
writer.
book is so different.
It is. And what I really, truly think I love the most about his writing is the affection and tenderness he has for the characters that he's mm-hmm. created. He's so understanding. It's just lovely. So anyway, I enjoyed it.
It's worth a read.
It is.
Definitely. All right.
Okay.
You got number 3?
I do. My next book is a fantasy, Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I know he is a prolific author, but this is actually the first thing I've read by him. I believe this book was the result of a Kickstarter campaign, maybe during COVID. And I actually didn't read it with my eyes. I listened to the audiobook and learned a new term from this. It is a graphic audiobook, and that's specifically what I'm recommending. There was a cast of characters, and there were sound effects and some music in the background. It felt like you were listening to a film, maybe. My children are preteen teenagers. We listened to this on a 12-hour road trip, and it was perfect. I don't know that I'd recommend it children age, but the age of my kids up. It was great. It is a classic coming-of-age story set in a fantasy world. The main character, Tress, she grows in courage and determination through growing confidence in her own self-agency. The book breaks the fourth wall, which I just find delightful in a book. You know, addresses the reader directly. And one thing that I've enjoyed since we listened to it as a family is there are now several quotes from the book that we toss back and forth to each other. Our favorite seems to come up every week, and it was, "A terrible idea executed brilliantly has to be better than a brilliant idea executed terribly."
That's good.
That is
really
good.
Yes.
Yeah. I like it.
So if you're looking for something a little different, a true fantasy, a way to pass 12 hours, I specifically recommend the graphic audiobook of this book.
Audiobook. Okay. I think I got one of those. We'll have to talk about that in a minute. All right. My third book is a memoir, so nonfiction, and it's All My Knotted Up Life, a memoir by Beth Moore. And this has been out for a little while, so probably a lot of people have already read it. But I just read it this past year, and it's incredibly thoughtful. It's funny. She shows intense vulnerability into her life and ministry of a woman that, especially if you're Southern Baptist, you feel like you know quite well because you've done her Bible studies and watched her videos, and you're like, oh, that's Beth. Yeah.
I've met her and sat in a Sunday school class that she taught a number of years ago in Houston.
Nice.
And I tell you, she was as well prepared for that one Sunday school class as for any Bible study I've seen.
Yeah, and she talks about that in the memoir. I'm not going to go into the memoir too much because it's just excellent, and you need to do the whole thing on your own. But I do highly recommend listening to this because she is the narrator of her own memoir, and she has a wonderful Southern drawl. And she emphasizes all the right things. She even kind of breaks down in a few spots, and it's powerful, and it's just wonderful. And it's hard not to love a woman who loves Jesus so fiercely, and that's what came out for me. So it was great.
I love that book, although I hated reading it because there are some really painful passages in it throughout. But I think something I really admired about the way she told her story is the respect that she gave to her sisters and brother in not telling too much that involved them. And she could have.
Right.
But
she told her story.
She told her story and maintained their privacy. And I thought she did that beautifully.
No, I thought it was great. I really enjoyed it. I really, at the end, she talks about this house that her husband built her, and I want to see this house.
Me too.
If you follow her on Instagram, you get little glimpses of it.
I did start following her on Instagram. Okay, I'm going to just stalk her now after this.
Yep.
Okay, that's my third book. Last one.
Well, this book is called Here One Moment by Liane Moriarty. She's the one who wrote Apples Never Fall.
I like her.
She's Canadian. She's written 10 novels, including 3
I would
New
have
York.
guessed she was Australian from her books.
I would have too.
Did I write Canadian?
She's
not Canadian.
Maybe she just loves Australians.
I don't know what happened there. I do not know. She is absolutely Australian, and this book takes place in Australia. I typed Canadian in my notes, and I'm insane. Okay.
I'm so sorry.
No,
I
that's
shouldn't have
okay.
questioned you.
Just remember, I'm recovering from an illness. But anyway, like that's an excuse. But anyway, she's written 3 New York Times bestsellers, and this was an interesting read. I read Here One Moment because I was intrigued by what I had heard about the premise of it. So here's the setup. An airplane is about to leave Hobart, Australia, for Sydney after a 2-hour delay. The passengers are tired, they're frustrated, they're all ready to get to their destinations. So they're pretty much done. The wait has been long. The flight, just to relieve any concerns you have, the flight will safely land in Sydney. Everyone will be fine in a couple of hours after takeoff. But none of the passengers will ever be the same after what happens on board.
Intriguing.
Ooh. We're introduced to about 15 to 18 of these random passengers on the plane. They represent a wide variety of ages, from tiny infant to 100-plus years old. Backgrounds, walks of life, very different people, just any random airplane full of folks. About 45 minutes into the flight, an unremarkable-looking gray-haired woman rises from her seat, appearing to be in a trance-like state, and walks the length of the plane. As she goes, she points intently at each passenger and says, age at death, cause of death.
I have chill bumps.
Yes. Okay. She makes very specific predictions and says, fate can't be fought. A wide variety of death ages are predicted, with some people slated to die in less than a year and others living to well over 100. One specific one, a 2-year-old, has said that she will live to be 103. The causes of death are varied also, from old age to a work accident to murder to cancer to many other causes. Passengers are understandably upset, but a flight attendant cannot reach this woman before she gets all the way to the end of the plane. Once she hits the last row and makes her prediction, the mystery woman returns to her seat, falls asleep until the end of the flight. After this strange opening, the rest of the novel focuses on how this experience affects the passengers. It's told from varying viewpoints at various points in the story, sometimes going back years, sometimes, lots and lots of narrators. This is an interesting study of human nature, showing how people placed in a situation not of their own choosing react. In effect, the author is asking us to place ourselves in their seats and ask how we would react, what we would do. Many questions enter the passenger's mind, like, can this weird woman actually be right in these predictions? Who is she? Is she a lunatic? Is she a prophet? Should she be taken seriously? Should I laugh this off or try to do something to change my fate? Should I tell my family and friends? So lots of things going on. The plot thickens very quickly, though. A few weeks later, when the first passenger actually dies, and then another.
Wow. Creepy.
This is not a predictable plot. Lots of surprises. Two things I would say as warnings to readers. First, this is a moderately long book. It's almost 500 pages, so it's not a fast read. It also slows down about a third of the way in, but never fear, it's going to pick right up again pretty quickly if you can get through that. So this is a good book when you're snowed in. If you're not going anywhere.
Stuck.
And finally, just so you know, some of the characters don't use appropriate language. So those characters. But
that sounds intriguing. I like her books because they always have like this creepy element that sometimes ends up being real, and sometimes you're like, oh, that's really not creepy at all. She explains that away.
Yes. Oddly enough, there is a fair amount of humor in this book.
Okay.
You wouldn't think so, but anyway.
Okay.
There it is.
I like it.
Okay.
Your last book.
Okay. My last book is This Is Happiness by Niall Williams. Lauren, I hear you laughing. We may have opposite takes on this book. And actually, I've recommended it to several people, and a few have loved it as much as me, and several others have been like, this was not my cup of tea. So this is a coming-of-age story set in rural Ireland in the mid-1900s. The writing style is what I love. It reminds me of Wendell Berry. This was a very unusual book for me. I tend to treat books like movies, and you would never walk away from a movie halfway through and come back in a couple days. I tend to read a book in one sitting. It is, not really the best trait when you're trying to balance other things. I have to be careful. But this book was unusual. I started it in February of 24, and I don't think I finished it until September. And I read a little bit at a time. I never stepped away from it. I enjoyed every bit of it. And I'm not sure Jayber by Wendell Berry is probably the only other book that I read that way.
That was Andrew Peterson's favorite book. I put it on my list, and you told me it was similar, and I took it right off.
You took it off. Okay. So,
wow.
Did you make it to the passage about the rain?
That's where I stopped.
Okay, so there's maybe a 2 to 3 page description of all the ways rain falls. And it is just so remarkable to me. I found Robert and said, I have to read this out loud to you. But I do have a quote. I actually brought in the book so I can read the quote, because this year I knew I may get an invitation back to this podcast if I was lucky. And so March last year, when I read this quote, I marked it and thought, this is the quote. Okay, so here's the quote. It seems to me the quality that makes any book, music, painting worthwhile is life, just that. Books, music, painting are not life, can never be as full, rich, complex, surprising, or beautiful. But the best of them can catch an echo of that, can turn you back to look out the window, go out the door aware that you've been enriched, that you have been in the company of something alive that has caused you to realize once again how astonishing life is. And you leave the book, gallery, or concert hall with that illumination, which feels, I'm going to say holy, by which I mean human raptness.
How many sentences was that?
It was one. Wasn't it a beautiful sentence? And so I would say this is not a good audiobook.
And that's what I did.
It's a bad audiobook. I did a whole lot of reading the paragraph, which is really one very long sentence, 3 or 4 times before then moving on, probably just going 4 or 5 pages at a time. But it was probably my favorite read of the year.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So the funny thing is that I received this book as a mysterious Christmas gift. I don't.
It's following you, Lauren.
I know. So that's what Jessica said. She's like, don't listen to it.
Don't listen.
Actually, put it in your hands and read the
Slowly.
words on the page.
And have something. I mean, I read lots of other books at the same time.
Yeah. So
this is not
it's
a
sitting on my
snowed-in,
table.
read in one day book.
So we'll see.
And you're certain that Jessica is not the one that gave you the Christmas card.
I wish
asked.
I had. I wish I had, but it was not.
Yeah,
And
no,
now-
it's a mystery. I don't know where it came
Now
from.
I'm wondering if she influenced someone to give you
I
that
know.
book. One, well, we may never know.
We may never know.
That's right.
So unless somebody says it was me,
Yeah.
I'll never know.
Not your mother.
No.
No.
No, I don't know where it came from. Just
Okay.
arrived
A
one
mystery
day.
forever.
I know. It's not sitting there. All right, my final book is Echo by Pam Muniz Ryan, and it is, what did we call this? A
Graphic audio.
A graphic audio book. And it's also like a middle grade book, so it's family appropriate. It'd be perfect on a road trip with children or with yourself, because that's how I do it. And so the premise starts off, lost and alone in a forbidden forest, Otto meets 3 mysterious sisters and suddenly finds himself entwined in a puzzling quest involving a prophecy, a promise, and a harmonica. But you didn't see that coming.
No way.
So decades later, Fredrik in Germany, Mike in Pennsylvania, and Ivy in California, each in turn become interwoven when the very same harmonica lands in their lives. All the children face daunting challenges, rescuing a father, protecting a brother, holding a family together, and ultimately pulled by the invisible thread of destiny. Their suspenseful solo stories converge in an orchestral crescendo.
Oh,
I know, right? So it's richly imagined, masterfully crafted. Echo pushes the boundaries of genre, form, and storytelling innovation to create a wholly original novel that will resound in your heart long after the last note has been struck. We've been talking about a lot of music here. So don't read this book. I want you to listen to it. Because it would be positively criminal to read a print copy of Echo when there is such a stunning audio version. So listen to it. The performances by the 4 readers are amazing. But what puts the production over the top is the seamless incorporation of music from start to finish. So if they talk about the Star Spangled Banner, you hear this little harmonica playing the Star Spangled Banner in the background. And so that just happens throughout the entire book. And there's even a blues harmonica duet that you get to listen to. And if you listen to it at like 1.5, like I do, it just goes a little quicker. So you can slow it down or speed it up. But in print, you really only get half the story. So this was a lovely, a little fantasy, but also some historical fiction. It's a great little book. It was recommended to me by a teacher who had read it to her class and just said her class was just loved it. And it was great. I loved it. So now she has a few more books that are on my list.
Well, you've convinced me that listening is the way to go with that one for sure.
Yeah, if you have a long trip.
Yeah,
It's a good one.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, ladies, this has been so fun. We have done the 2025 Burt, Matz, Youse book list. Another successful year. My goal for 26 will be to come back and say, I read This Is Happiness. And
Okay.
we can talk about that. So it's on the podcast now.
So
I have 11 months.
You're making that as a
Okay.
promise.
Yes.
We're
correct.
going to open next year asking.
Yes, and I'm
Okay.
just going
What'd
to be
you
like,
think?
those sentences were so long.
That's
Edit, people.
this is something to which I'm going to look forward all year long to hear.
You're going to check in on my progress?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Is it going to be like month by month?
Oh
and
my gosh.
slow?
I probably need to break it out. Like you have to get to chapter 5 by the end of February.
Oh no.
Well, I do have several books I'm going to be adding to my reading list from this. This is
Yeah.
I'm excited.
So fun. Well, we're so thankful for the listeners and watchers who joined us. We have so much fun. We could probably make this podcast like days long
We could.
because
No
we
doubt.
just have so much fun together talking about the books.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us. I hope your 2025 is going well. Please keep Hannibal-LaGrange in your prayers and keep reading.